All right, so in this screencast, this is the third screencast for Chapter 5. We're going to look at a specific example of price ceilings, and we're going to look at the example of rent control. So I realized that the kind of stylized price ceiling, one price for all apartments, it doesn't really fit the more complex kind of rent control that you might have somewhere like the city, but I think the general points that we're going to make here apply even to the more complicated types of rent control. For example, in the city, only buildings built before a certain time are rent controlled, and that actually was put in place and changed because of some of the problems that we're going to talk about in this screencast. So rent control, again, is a price ceiling on apartments or housing, and the goal of it is to help low-income renters be able to find affordable places to live, all right? But there are some unintended consequences of rent control. Remember, there's going to be a shortage because the quantity demanded is going to be greater than the quantity supplied, all right? There's going to be a decrease in the long-term investment in the building of new apartment buildings because if the price can't go to the market price, then why should I build a new apartment building? Some projects that formerly would have been profitable to build now won't be profitable to build. Some land that would have been profitable to develop now no longer will be profitable to develop. All right. There'll also be a reduction in the quality of apartments as landlords decide not to renovate, they decide not to do maintenance because they can't get the price that the market would demand. There'll also be black markets that will have much higher prices than the regular market would have had if there weren't any rent control. All right, landlords will start nickel and diming tenants with fees to increase revenue. So a lot of things that formerly were just kind of lumped in, maybe now you have to, maybe formerly laundry would have been provided in each unit. Now laundry is centrally provided and you have to pay for your own laundry rather than just having a machine provided for you. You may formerly have gotten cable just lumped in, now you get charged for cable. Things like that where these small fees get put into place to try to recover some of that rent that they can't charge anymore. There's also an unintended consequence that housing gets gridlocked. People won't move around or move out because they will lose their rent-controlled apartment, all right? This makes units actually harder to find, all right? So all of these things combined mean that the policy of rent control can often end up hurting the very people it was supposed to help because of all these unintended consequences, all right? So remember our long run, short run model that we did in the graphing screencast. So in the short run, the shortage, so the short run, this is short run supply, short run demand. So the quantity supplied in the short run, quantity demanded, the shortage was this big. But over time, supply and demand get more elastic, all right? And so what that means is over time, the shortage actually gets worse and worse over the long run. So actually, it can exacerbate the very problem it was intended to fix, all right? So what about the rich in rent control? So as it turns out, Massachusetts decided to end rent control because only 6% of the people who were living in rent-controlled apartments were actually poor. There's anecdotal evidence in places like New York City where very famous actors and actresses end up living in rent-controlled apartments for years and years. So a lot of the benefit doesn't actually go to those who are poorest because rich people can afford all the fees, they can afford to renovate if they need to renovate themselves, and most importantly, they can afford to get agents who can go out and seek out these rent-controlled apartments, and they can stand in line and be some of the first people to get these rent-controlled apartments. Because remember, they're allocated not according to willingness to pay anymore, they're allocated according to some other mechanism. So maybe it's standing in line, maybe it's putting in a ton of applications, whatever it is, wealthier people are more able to afford to do those sorts of things. So is that the best allocation of resources? So is rent control really the best way to help people who can't afford apartments get those apartments, or maybe are there other ways with less unintended consequences? And remember, we have these long-term development issues. Cities without rent control tend to have higher vacancy rates, which means it's easier to find an apartment if you want to find an apartment. Places that have rent control have actually much lower vacancy rates. It's much harder to find an apartment, both because of the elasticity long run, but also because there aren't new buildings going up because those projects are no longer profitable.